I never imagined the day would come when I would have to make this decision. For years, I had heard stories about people leaving their homes behind to move into a nursing home, but I always thought that wouldn't be the case for me. However, life has a way of surprising us, and when the time came, there seemed to be no other option. At first, I thought it would be an easy transition, a new place, new people, a different routine. But it wasn't long before I began to notice the true effects of this decision. Moving to a nursing home is not just a change of residence. It is a change in the way you live, in the way you see yourself, and in how the world perceives you. There are things that no one tells you before taking this step, things that are only understood when you are already inside. Today I want to share 6 lessons I learned in this process, 6 regrets that, if I had known sooner, might have made me consider other options. Because what I discovered next is something I never imagined. If there's one thing you take for granted until you lose it, it's independence. Before I moved into the nursing home, my life was full of small, everyday choices. What time to wake up, what to eat, when to go for a walk. They were simple, almost automatic decisions, but they were mine. Here, however, everything follows a pre-established schedule. Meals are served at the same time every day, without exception. The lights go out at a certain time. Activities are rigidly scheduled, and days begin to feel like identical pieces of an infinite puzzle. At first, I tried to hold on to my old ways. I asked for a little more time in the morning to have a quiet breakfast, but they told me that the kitchen closed early. I wanted to go for a walk whenever I felt like it, but I discovered that I had to give advance notice and, in some cases, even ask permission. It was then that I realized that I was no longer the owner of my time. But the most difficult thing was not the schedules, but realizing that even the most basic decisions were no longer in my hands. At first, visits were frequent. Sundays brought with them the laughter of my grandchildren, the stories of my children, and the warmth of family conversation. I held on to those moments, convinced that they would continue to be part of my new routine. But over time, the visiting days became more sporadic. Sometimes there were excuses, work, commitments, traffic. Other times, there was simply no explanation. Only the days passed, and the phone remained silent. It's hard to describe what it feels like to watch the calendar move forward without a call, without a visit. The asylum is full of people, but the feeling of loneliness sets in anyway, like a lingering shadow. The hallways are filled with faces that were once part of bustling families, but now seem trapped in frozen time, waiting for something that is no longer coming. Some nights I wonder, am I a burden to them? Could it be that it's easier to get on with their lives without remembering me too much? I don't want to think that it is like that, but when days turn into weeks and weeks into months, the doubt becomes increasingly difficult to ignore. At first, I thought that life in the asylum would be like a kind of long rest, without worries or responsibilities. But I soon realized that without tasks or routines to give me purpose, the days were beginning to fade. When you come to a place like this, many of the things that used to occupy your time and mind disappear. There is no longer a need to cook, shop, or tend to the garden that I had loved to take care of so much. The hobbies that once gave me satisfaction seem so far away now. I remember one resident, Don Manuel, who used to tell stories about his work as an engineer. For years, he had led projects, made important decisions, but when he got here, he was left with nothing to do. At first, he began painting, then writing letters to his family. But over time, those activities faded as well. Soon, I didn't see him do anything anymore. His chair remained empty, and his gaze was lost. The spark I had before slowly faded, and now it feels like a haunting reminder of what could happen. One wonders, do I really need something to motivate me every day? Or is it simply inevitable to lose that spark over time? When I arrived at the nursing home, I thought that the most difficult thing would be adapting to the routine and the change of environment. I didn't imagine that the lack of physical activity would be so impactful on my body. At first, the daily walks became shorter and, little by little, they disappeared. The pace of life here is different, calmer, but also more sedentary. What I hadn't anticipated was the effect it would have on my health. The lack of exercise began to take its toll, and I soon realized that my muscles felt weaker, my joints stiffer. Something as simple as climbing the stairs now seemed like a challenge. I remember Donna Isabel, a resident who arrived with surprising energy. At first, he was seen walking through the hallways with his cane, smiling and chatting with everyone. But as the months passed, his mobility began to decrease. The doctor said that due to lack of physical activity, his muscles had rapidly atrophied. He could no longer get out of the chair without help, and his face, once full of life, began to fade. What became clear to me is that, even if one believes that the body can endure, inactivity accelerates deterioration. Movement is essential, not only to keep the body fit, but also to keep the mind active. If I learned anything here, it's that you should never underestimate the importance of moving, even if it's just a little each day. One of the most difficult aspects of adjusting to the asylum has been the loss of my privacy. At home, I had my moments of solitude, my space where I could do whatever I wanted, without anyone interrupting me. But here, the situation is completely different. The staff is always present, making sure we are well taken care of. But the constant supervision comes at a price. The doors are never completely closed, and there's always someone in the hallway, entering or leaving the rooms. At first, I thought I'd get used to it, that it would just be a matter of time. However, as the days passed, I began to feel like I no longer had control over my own moments. My decisions about how to spend my time, what to do during the day, became less my own and more dictated by the routine of the asylum. The little things that once gave me pleasure, like enjoying a good book in silence, became increasingly difficult to find. Added to this was the fact that instead of having a private room, I now share the space with 2 other people. At first, I thought it would be easy. I thought I would just share the room, but I soon realized how difficult it was to have to share not only the physical space, but also the most intimate moments. The conversations we used to have alone with our families, the small gestures of privacy that gave us dignity, are lost here in the blink of an eye. Additionally, what struck me the most was the need for assistance with the most basic tasks. From dressing to eating, there's always someone helping me, something I never imagined I would experience. The loss of autonomy is not only physical, but also emotional. Every time someone has to assist us, it reminds us that we are no longer the same as before, that control over our own lives has diminished. It's hard to describe what it feels like when you realize that you are no longer in complete control of your life. That feeling of losing one's dignity is something no one should experience without carefully thinking about it. When I decided to move to the nursing home, I convinced myself that it would be temporary. I thought it was a phase that would pass quickly, that I just needed a little help until I could regain my stability and return home. But over time, that expectation of temporality began to fade. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and before I knew it, home seemed like an increasingly distant idea. The hardest thing about all this is the feeling of being trapped in a place I can't get out of. It's not just that my strength is no longer the same, but also the practical and financial obstacles that stand in the way. The asylum expenses are considerable, and the fact that my pension barely covers what I need makes it almost impossible to consider returning home. Even if I managed to improve physically, how could I afford to be independent again? As the days passed, I realized that life in the asylum, with all its sacrifices, was becoming the only viable option. The staff, who at first felt like support, now seemed like the only support. My family visits, which used to be the only comfort, became more infrequent, and eventually the idea of returning home began to feel like a distant dream. I felt more and more resigned. Life outside this place seemed impossible, and remaining in the asylum seemed like a sentence from which he could not escape. In that moment, I realized how easy it is to fall into the routine of accepting what's around you, even if it's not what you really want. The option of leaving here became more and more remote, until one day, life here stopped being just an alternative and became my only reality. Looking back, I find myself reflecting on whether nursing homes are really the best option for everyone. In my case, I was faced with a situation in which I felt that there were not many alternatives, but now that I look at my experience with perspective, I realize that there are other ways to live old age that perhaps I did not consider at the time. Nursing homes can offer an immediate solution to many needs, but they are not always the ideal answer. The key is not to make hasty decisions without exploring other possibilities that can provide a higher quality of life, while maintaining dignity and independence. It is important to remember that no one is forced to follow a path that does not appeal to them or does not fit their own values and desires. There are many alternatives that can be more enriching, such as support at home, home care, or the accompaniment of family and close friends. Technology and support networks are changing the way in which older people can live with dignity and well-being, without having to resign themselves to a life they did not choose. That's why I'm calling on everyone who is considering moving into a nursing home to think carefully. Reflect on the alternatives available, not only for your physical well-being, but also for your emotional well-being. Staying active, both mentally and physically, is essential. There are many ways to keep our lives meaningful and purposeful, even when circumstances change. The key is to preserve our independence for as long as possible, not only in physical terms, but also in our ability to make decisions that allow us to live according to our own desires. If you are in a situation similar to what I experienced, I encourage you not to lose hope. It may be difficult to see beyond the present moment, but the opportunities to live fully are still there, even when the options seem to be reduced. If you feel stuck, remember that there are always ways to take a step toward a freer future, even if that means seeking support to make difficult decisions. There is much more you can do to regain your autonomy and live a life that makes you feel fulfilled and valuable. Don't let fear or despair cloud your vision. Every day you live is an opportunity to rediscover the beauty of life, even if it is through small moments. Life doesn't end when you face old age. On the contrary, it is a new chapter full of learning, moments to enjoy, and to build new experiences. Don't be afraid to live with purpose, to look for alternatives that allow you to be yourself, with independence and dignity, because you deserve it. And never forget that there is always a way to move forward,